My name is Nitin Pradhan, and today we are going to discuss doing business with the US federal government. So let's get started. So let me start this presentation by talking about what is the federal government opportunity. And the federal government opportunity can be broken up in two sections: contract opportunities and grant opportunities. So let's talk about the federal government contract opportunities. And so in this chart here, I have shown the contract awards the federal government made between 2012 and 2016. And as you can see, in 2016, it made contract awards of a little more than $440 billion. And typically over the last 5 years, that number has stayed somewhere in the region of $400 billion plus. Now let's look at the federal government grant opportunities. So in this particular chart, you can see from 2012 to 2016, the federal government has made, again, significant amount of investments via federal grants. In 2016 alone, the federal government made about $660 billion of grant awards. And again, that number has been well over $500 billion for last the 5 years. So again, as you can see, this tremendous amount of opportunity in federal contracts and grants. So if you actually take these more contracts and grants together, that opportunity is over $1 trillion annually. That's right, $1 trillion. Roughly 40% of that is in contracts and 60% of that is in grants. So the federal government is the world's largest marketplace. And that is absolutely the reason, if you're a business, you should get involved with the US federal government. Now, I want to give you some perspective here. And to give you a perspective, I'm going to talk about the venture capital spending in the United States in the year 2016. Now, everybody knows about the VCs and the investments they make in entrepreneurs and startups. That's a very sexy and interesting area for a lot of companies and people to get into. So how much does the VC industry spend in the US in 2016? And if you can see in this chart, the total amount of investments the venture capital industry has made in 2016 across the entire United States has been about $60 billion. Now that's a fraction of the amount of investment the government has made in contracts and grants. So that is one more reason why getting involved with the federal government and working on federal government contracts and grants is a very, very big and interesting opportunity. So now I want to talk about the same opportunity from a business perspective. So if you look at the federal government, it is a $1 trillion opportunity. And if you look at the businesses in US, there are roughly about 28 million businesses there. So of these 28 million businesses, we estimate that about 136,000 of them are really attempting to work with the federal government. That's right, attempting to work with the federal government, which means they have taken some step to actually work with the federal government, perhaps got some small grants or contracts, but not something very, very serious. Now, of course, that number is less than 1% of the 28 million businesses that are available in the United States. Now, if you further look forward, if you check out how many businesses are actively doing work with the federal government, we estimate that number to be about 3,000 businesses. That's right. 3,000 businesses are really going after the $1 trillion worth of opportunity in the federal government. And that is why we think this area has a lot more opportunity for competition. And so if you are one of those businesses who is not actively participating in the federal government opportunities, whether they be contracts or grants, you should consider that as of now. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about why should businesses do work with the federal government. Obviously, we have already discussed that it's a very large marketplace, and that itself should be a motivation enough for you and your business. But let me give you some more motivation. So here are some other examples and reasons why you should get involved. First and foremost, you need very limited capital to start working with the federal government. Second, you can actually build a sizable and profitable business working with the federal government. The third interesting thing is that the federal government has special set aside programs for startups and small businesses. So that means the federal government has put aside certain funding for certain kinds of businesses. For example, women owned businesses, veteran owned businesses, minority owned businesses. They have special funding to get special projects from the federal government. Now, of course, the federal government can act as a hedge against recessions and downturns of a US economy. That means if you're a business and you're working only with the private sector, and if a recession hits, you really have no place to turn around because the private sector may actually curtail its spending. But that's exactly the time when the federal government actually increases spending through stimulus packages, as you may have seen in 2008 and 2009. The federal government also spends money across the nation. So even though the federal government is located in Washington, D.C., the project that you're bidding on could be right in your community. And you can select where you want to approach and what kind of opportunities you want to go through, depending on what space and where exactly those opportunities are getting executed. And then finally, you can help grow local jobs, local companies, and local competitiveness and actually deliver better results to citizens via your involvement. So these are some of the reasons why you should get involved with the federal government. Now, of course, you're going to ask me, how do you really win in the federal government? And so I really have a three-step strategy for winning. And so let me take you through this. So the first step is get involved. As you saw, there are 28 million businesses, and only about 3,000 or so are actively involved in the federal government. So there's lots and lots of opportunity for other businesses to get involved. Clearly, without getting involved and getting involved actively, you're not going to win federal contracts and grants. While federal government is a large opportunity, it's not an opportunity without no competition. There is competition. So if you want to win, you better get involved. Step number two. Once you decide to get involved, you need to actually understand the startup mechanics of how to do work with the federal government. The federal government requires certain registrations that allow you to work with federal government contracts and grants. And you need to understand those and actually make sure that you have complied with them so you can actually go out on bid on federal grants and contracts. So that's step number two. Again, that is not a very complicated step. It is really a mechanical step. And if you read through, you should be able to achieve this fairly quickly. And then finally, you have the third step. And the third step is very, very critical. That is the step which is going to define winners from losers. And that is the step of winning execution strategy. And the winning execution strategy requires a lot of experience and expertise and understanding of how the federal government selects opportunities for awards in terms of contracts and grants. And that is what I call the insider track. This is where most of the companies falter. And if you want to win and win big, you better understand how to execute your strategy by learning what's happening inside the federal government. Now, there are two ways you can do this. One, of course, is you can muddle your way. You can do trial and error. And over a period of time, after a lot of effort and energy being spent, somewhere along the line, you may learn what you need to learn and actually win. Now, there's another way. We have actually created a program that allows you to understand and set up this execution strategy. And we're going to talk about it a little later. Now, let me just go back. As I said, my name was Nitin Pradhan. I have been a senior executive in the US federal government as well as state and local governments in the United States. I am the co-founder of ScaleUP USA Growth Accelerator, and our focus has been on building great American businesses. I was the CIO, or the Chief Information Officer, of the US Department of Transportation, USDOT, where I had oversight of over $3.5 billion in annual acquisitions portfolio. I had oversight over 3,000 employees, 10,000 contractors, and 200 major IT systems. And what I want to talk today is about our Federal Business Acceleration Training Program. And so let me start off with a little story. When I was the CIO of the US Department of Transportation, I was meeting roughly 2 companies a day because we wanted to evaluate their capability and capacity to work with us. And so over a period of 4 years, I met over 1,000 companies and their executives. And I got to listen to all kind of pitches, sales pitches, so all kinds of other pitches from these companies to be the preferred supplier for products and services. And I learned what was a good pitch versus a bad pitch. And I learned what made one company successful over others. And I took all of this whole strategy and created this federal business acceleration training program. So essentially, what we did was I learned over 1,000 companies and actually took all this knowledge and actually created this program, which I'm really offering to you. So let me talk about how really I executed my strategy and how I have learned and improved our training program. So when I left the US federal government, I initially started doing one-on-one advisory for federal contractors. So I was actually meeting them one-on-one and advising them how to grow. This was very lucrative, but was complicated and not scalable. The next stage or version of my advisory was what I call federal contractor cohort training program. So rather than do one-on-one kind of training for federal contractors, I sort of grouped them together and started doing group training programs. And this was a little better because actually I could scale it. But again, this had some of the same difficulties that the version 1 had, which means that most of the companies that I worked with were from in and around DC because it was not scalable to other regions of the US. And so finally, after a lot of tinkering, we have come up with this new model, which is exceptionally efficient and very, very cost effective. And that is the Federal Business Acceleration Training Program. This program is unique because it's set up on the internet. It's all on the cloud. It's always on. It's on demand. It is very affordable. You can access it anytime and anywhere on any kind of device, which means you can access it right from a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, or even a smartphone. And it is available for an entire year. So you can decide when you want to access it and where you want to access it. So what I would suggest at this stage is let me quickly take you to this particular program itself, and you can see for yourself what we are offering. So the way you do that is you go to www.scaleupusa.co and you will be able to access that particular program. So let's do that now. So here is the program. If you actually go to scaleupusa.co or XYZ, you should be able to ultimately come to this program. And the program itself is called Federal Business Growth Acceleration Training Program. And what this program is a step-by-step insider's guide to set up and grow a successful federal supplier or contractor business. And the best thing that I would suggest at this stage is that you go out and look at these two sections. One is the preview section and other is the buy section. I would strongly suggest that you actually register for the preview. It's completely free. All you need to do is register. And once you register, you should be able to take this entire first section of the program, which is marked preview. Once you take this half an hour worth of section, you will understand whether the federal government opportunity is for you or not for you. If you think it is for you, that's the time I would suggest you go out and buy the program. The program costs a little less than $500 and it's available for you for an entire year, and you can decide when and where you want to take it. And now in this program, there are about 13 chapters that you can go through. Each chapter has a number of lectures, and each chapter ends with a case study. And this case study is actually based on what you have learned in lectures in that particular chapter. And the case study actually pushes you towards building an execution strategy. So by the time you complete the entire chapters, you would have a complete and detailed execution strategy that you should be able to go out and win. Now, again, federal government is a highly competitive industry. And if you want to win there, not only do you need to do hard work and have patience and really have a lot of luck, but you also need to have this winning strategy. And that's what we are helping you create. So if you look at this whole program, I'm going to quickly go through it. It starts off with winning federal business strategy, and there are 9 steps that we talk about. And then we sort of talk about planning the strategic federal entry, and that's really giving you some early analysis of how you make an entry. And then we do some things which are very, very critical for your success. We talk about how do you build a winning team to win in the federal marketplace. Again, there are some nuances here of how that team should be put together so that you become a winner. And we talk about that based on what experiences we have seen that have worked and not worked. We then also talk about establishing the federal business. So if you don't have a business that's registered or registered that's compliant for working with the federal government, we talk about some of those kind of aspects. Then we, of course, talk about the federal business funding mechanisms. And we're talking not only about the contracts and grants and cooperative agreements, but we are talking about the differences and other kinds of programs that you may be able to use to grow in the federal marketplace. We also then talk about the federal tools of the trade. You might be aware of some of the basic tools that are available for most businesses like FedBizOps and grants.gov, but we are talking about other tools which can be very, very interesting, and you can draw a lot of information from them. And we will teach you how to use those tools so that you can become a winner. So again, there's a lot of information here that you can learn. Step by step, you're going to improve your capability. And as you improve your capability, your chances of winning are going to go up. We also then talk about creating a winning sales program. Clearly, the federal government is a very large place, and you need to have a structured sales program. And we talk about how to do it and how to execute it. We then also talk about something called FAR. FAR is Federal Acquisitions Regulation. That's the entire regulation under which the federal government buys goods and services. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the entire federal acquisition process, because you need to understand it so that you can actually learn to become a winner. We also talk about winning product integration strategy. If you appropriately integrate products in your services, you have a distinct edge. And we talk about how to do it, why to do it, and when to do it. Then, of course, you need to understand that if you're going to go after federal contracts and grants, in most cases, you'll have to write a proposal. And we teach you how to write a winning business proposal. So we are going through the entire process of pre-proposal to during proposal to post-proposal. This is, again, a very, very important chapter. Again, we are not just teaching you how to write a proposal. We are talking about tips and tricks and step-by-step practices that you can do to actually make a better and a winning proposal. Then, of course, if you win a particular project, whether it's a contract or a grant, you need to execute it well. And so we talk about peak performance, which is really actually building a program and project and executing that program or project exceptionally well. And then finally, we talk about, the innovative and inorganic growth strategies. Again, these are very, very interesting strategies that I have seen during my course of career that companies have executed to actually grow much faster, better, and cheaper. So we talk about them. So all in all, this is a fairly exhaustive program, fairly detailed program, but it does not take a whole bunch of time. If you actually did this whole program in an aggressive fashion, you should be able to complete it in less than a week. If you take some time, you might be able to complete it in a couple of months. Again, you have access to this program for the entire year. So I would suggest that you go out and register for this program and actually make best use of it. And we wish you all the best for your strategy to winning in the federal government. Thank you.